Hello, friends. Our season finale for this podcast is with Zipporah Doiron. Zippy is a registered counselling therapist who lives in a tiny house in Canada. This was such a great conversation. We talk about language, the beauty of grief, how common sense is cultural, and being okay with the unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, please show your love on Spotify by giving it a 5-star rating. It'll take about 7 seconds and it'll help get these episodes out to more people. You don't even have to write anything, just 2 taps and it's done. Thank you to my family and friends for listening and supporting season 1. I honestly, I don't know how I got here. I am so grateful. I can't believe I interviewed so many people and I feel so great about it. I didn't realize I would enjoy it this much and be so satisfied by it. These are the kind of conversations that I've enjoyed watching so much, on TV and on YouTube. So to run my own show and have these interviews have just been just the best. I don't know what else to say. And like the fact that one other person wants to listen to it other than me or my parents. I mean, come on, like that's amazing. I think I'm just going to focus on some music for now, write some songs and jam out soon. But you can keep up, with my music on my YouTube channel or follow at I'm Banipreet on Instagram or TikTok, or maybe you'll just see me sing live. Who knows? Thank you again. Thank you for riding with me. Bye for now and enjoy this episode. Zippy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's exciting to be here. I'm so excited. This is the first recorded podcast I've done. So this is kind of cool.
I am honored. You grew up in a large family and you actually read encyclopedias growing up. Can you imagine children reading that today?
Yeah, I remember, sometimes when libraries, they have shelves that they're like, this is free. And I remember my mom picked up this, it was from 1972 or something like that. So it was the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1972. And oh man, I can still remember what it smelled like. And I would just choose an encyclopedia and find the place and read. So I remember reading about the Himalayas and being like, what? That's a thing. And just blew my mind. So yeah.
It's harder for children to pick up books these days. I work with primary school kids, so elementary school. And, whether you like it or not, they're so tempted to get to devices. I'm in a Montessori school, so we have a lot of books around and a lot of content to do your own research the proper way. But they always get tempted. And I just imagine Google didn't, wasn't a thing. But you studied French.
Yep. Yeah, I did study French. Yeah.
How do you say this is the Unpacking Creative Lives podcast with Banipreet? Can you say that in French?
Oh, yeah. Voilà. You just say voilà, c'est le, and then the name of, can you tell me the name again?
Unpacking Creative Lives.
Ooh, the funny thing is there's certain words that I don't know. So unpacking. Quand tu devais déménager, tu vas comme vider, empty, to empty. This is the thing I find really interesting about learning languages is I remember before I spoke French, because I speak French every day, but you see there's still holes. So I live on the same land as a francophone, and so we speak French all day, every day. But there's certain words that you don't come across, like unpack. I don't know this word.
Maybe they just didn't need it as well. And I think that there's so many words that you can't directly translate. I see a lot of Indian Hindi films and Punjabi films that have not been correctly translated. Actually, we were watching a movie. So we should explain to people how we met. So my sister-in-law, Jessie, introduced me to Zippy. And Zippy and Jessie are really good friends. And they met in Vietnam, which we will talk about. We will get to. I remember we were watching a Punjabi, a classic Hindi film. We were watching a classic Hindi film and we had the subtitles on for Jessie. And when we were reading it, it just didn't translate well. You know, it's just not accurate. Like, it just doesn't give that the taste of the language and like the real nuances of that. And I'm sure you struggle with that too. Like, especially, you know, you went to Portugal as well. But before we go to Portugal, actually, sorry, I just want to say you studied theater, but you said you were more interested in people than production. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So that kind of brings me back to like even the language learning. So I did my degree, my theater degree in Montreal, and that's when I met all of these lovely francophone people who were meeting me in English, and I was like, I should meet them in French. And I remember because in Canada we have to study French for like 8 years in school.
What was that? Wait, what was that? To our listeners, Zippy had like she scrunched her face up a bit and she did bubble quotation marks, just so you know, just so you get a full visual.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the time I was like, so I was in an Anglophone province. I was in Ontario, and so I was in a very Anglophone area. Everything was, you know, we had one French channel, it was channel 13, and it was a bit snowy all the time, very fuzzy, you know. Um, and so nobody spoke French, and so we learned French because we had to, right? And so you know, I learned French, but it was always like I remember some of the units of study were on like aliens coming to Earth, and so it was never about like having a conversation. It was always an interesting thing where it was all about like reading and writing was number one, and it wasn't entirely useful. But I remember learning all this vocab and moving to Quebec, and I'm like, oh, I got this. I speak French. I studied French for 8 years. I got this, and I do not got this. I did not got this. And so it was absolutely horrendous and very humbling to go. And as I start learning more French, and now I would say, you know, my lovely neighbor, she says, I would say you're 95%, you know, bilingual. I wouldn't say I'm like fluent, but bilingual. And even with 95%, I feel so dumb so frequently where I'm like, oh, there's a word I don't know, and I don't know how to say this, and how would I say that? So I find like, as in many things in life, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
The more you know, the more you don't know.
The more you don't know, and I find that so refreshing to just kind of accept of like, oh, I'm never going to know everything. So I may as well lean into being a big dummy and just like really enjoy the ride. And so that's kind of how I was approaching theater as well, because it's hard to make your living in theater. It's hard to do all of that. And so I kind of put out of my mind that I was going to make my living at that and just kind of lean into the weird humans that I would encounter. And I so loved the different productions that I was involved in because they were never in a theater. So my background was theater and development. So it was looking at theater as a means of advocacy and of education and all that kind of stuff. And so I've never done a production in a theater, except for in high school. And then later on, when I did community theater when I lived in Hanoi, we did it in a theater. But other than that, it was always like theater where the community was from, you know, the community that we were working with and creating with, that's what we would do. And I mean, I like performing. I think it's fun, but I love people. And that's the thing I found more interesting is like hanging out in rehearsals and in between the different stuff, you know, meeting the beautiful people and like starting to really kind of, yeah, just appreciate the different humans that I was coming across in life. And the production was like, I mean, it was fun, but the parts that I remember have nothing to do with a performance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's so cool. That's so amazing. I really didn't think about it like that. And I wouldn't have thought about it that way. When you mentioned when you know, like the more you know, the more you don't know. And like that's just the approach to take. I think of just this idea of like trying new things. Well, why don't you just fail really well and then you'll keep doing it? But I was on this, I was listening to this podcast about like, it was this guy who runs his own podcast and he interviews high performers, like elite performers, and talks about their process. And then he came onto another podcast to share his, you know, what he extracted from all those conversations he's had with them as a host of his own podcast. He said successful people fail the most.
Mm.
You know, they're not afraid to fail. They're not afraid to try new things and just like put themselves out there. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I could fail really well. Like, you know, like that mentality just makes you want to try and get better. And then sooner or later, that muscle of like trying new things or feeling like you don't know becomes more of like a positive thing. Just like you said, well, I'm going to be like a really good dummy, you know, like that's the mentality.
Absolutely. Lean into it. Yeah. I think there's also, because now I work in mental health, there feels like there's so much like positive correlation between this ability to just let go and say, like, I don't know the answer. And so today I'm just going to see what the answer is today. And what works best today. And there's like, it's this lack of rigidity, and there's so much rigidity in our lives right now. And I mean, for always, it's not just a now thing, but you know, the being able to be flexible, being able to be spontaneous and be curious and be wrong. I think that just makes us more gentle beings in the world, and it allows us to not beat ourselves up when we realize, oh, what I've thought for so long is not right. Oh my God. And so then we're not married to this, but it's part of my identity, because maybe part of my identity can be that sometimes I'm wrong. I'm the identity of a learner rather than identity of like a person who's got it all figured out.
It's terrifying. I think it takes courage to even get there because so many people want to be right and want to. I mean, there's nothing wrong with finding your information and coming up with an articulate answer or like, you know, doing your research, but there is a sense of peace in knowing that you don't know, and that's okay. And I think not just about things, but about like what's going to happen, you know, and that lack of control is such an essential part of just operating as a human being. It's so true. So I really want to talk about Portugal and teaching. So you went into teaching, and your first teaching job as an elementary school teacher, which is primary school in Australia, was in Portugal. You started to learn Portuguese from your neighbors, and, you know, you're off to a foreign country not knowing the native language. Like, what was that even like?
Well, I had a rule when I was teacher training of ABC anywhere but Canada, because there was no jobs for teachers in Canada at the time. It was after the recession it was in 2009 that was in my teacher training. And I remember the first day I walked in for my education degree, like all of these like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed students are like, we're going to change the world, like Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. You know, we were so excited, and they're like, welcome. We hope you're not looking for a job anytime soon because there's none there. And we were all like, thanks, I guess. So like none of the teachers that were meant to be leaving left because of the recession that occurred and all that kind of stuff. So my rule was anywhere but Canada, and I applied all over the show, and I got accepted and for my first teaching job in Portugal, and it was very exciting. And I will say, ignorance is bliss. Now I look back and go, oh my God, I knew nothing.
Yeah, how did I do that? Like, what was going through my head?
Yeah, but now, again, now that I know more, I know that I know nothing. But back then, I was like, I know so much.
I'll be fine.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely no problem. So I was welcomed by this lovely woman called Teresa. And she was like, okay, so the culture here is a coffee-based culture. So you're going to need to figure out what type of coffee you like, because every meeting you're going to do is going to be like bookended by coffee. When you meet up with friends, you're going to have coffee. And I was like, I got this. Before this, I was a tea drinker. Now I even have a tattoo of coffee on my foot. So, you know, like
priorities.
It changed my tune, let's say. The first thing I learned how to say was how to order the coffee that I liked. So it was called galão, which is like 2/3 hot milk and 1/3 espresso coffee. And so the first thing I learned how to say was, "Eu quero um galão, faz favor," which is I would like a galão, please. And then my housemate moved in, and she also liked galão, and she moved in like 3 or 4 weeks after me. So I'd already been learning Portuguese as I muddled around the world. And she liked galão as well. So I was like, well, I need to learn how to order too. And so the word for two is dois, and the plural for galão is galões. And I was like, eu quero 2 galões, faz favor. This is a ridiculous language. I must learn this.
Like, what's happening in your mouth? You know, all these like new formations, right?
Yeah, it's like it's placed in a different place in your mouth, and I was just like, my brain exploded. I'm like, I know nothing. This is amazing. And so I'd wander around, and I still have it, this little notebook. I'd wander around with a notebook. And so the thing that I realized for me, the way my brain learns language is like to go by a verb at a time. Like, what verb do I need? And so I was like, I am, I have, I need, I want, I like. Those were kind of the first ones that I learned. And so I was learning all those verbs, and then tacking vocabulary on as I went. And so I would just like be running around and like with this little notebook. And then when I'd encounter people and I'd learn a new word, I'm like, oh, ¿cuál es esa palabra? Like, what's this word? And then I get them to write it down for me. And that's how I made friends, because I was a big nerd and just like, what is that word? Is what I would say. ¿Cuál es esa palabra? What's that word? And then they'd write it down. So I made lots of lovely friends, and Brazilians in particular. There were a lot of Brazilians in my neighborhood. So most Portuguese people above a certain, or sorry, below a certain age speak very fluent English. So most of my Portuguese friends speak to me in English, but all my Brazilian friends are like, we don't speak English, so you're gonna have to learn Portuguese. And I was like, got it.
Got it. You got the coffee. You're good to go.
You got it. I got my dois galões. Vamos embora.
That's so good. That kind of pressure is so good. And like, I find that that's always the best way to learn a new language, is that immersive learning, when you're just stuck in there and you have to figure it out. I was in India for 7 months years ago, and I mean, it really pushed me to communicate properly. They always knew I was from outside. I mean, even my brown skin, like, they know you're an outsider, you know, even if you kind of blend in physically in the crowd. But just the way you communicate is it's so helpful if you want to learn a new language, to actually go to that country and just survive. And I always think about, I don't know if you know this, but I love bees, and I'm obsessed with just the analogy of bees and like the natural lessons that happen just from bees and plants and nature. But I interviewed a beekeeper a few episodes ago, and I love him, and he's so interesting. So he like plants hives in people's backyards, because he started to realize that each like suburb in, or each town in a city, so each suburb in Sydney had a different taste of honey. And so he was getting varieties just from like, you know, next door neighbors in like in a suburb in Sydney. And so I thought that was so cool. And so he ended up planting a hive in my backyard. This was ages ago. And he had this cool thing where, you know, at that time he was doing this because he had just started, but later on I think he started to charge a fee. But at that time he said, you know, I'll plant my hive in your backyard, I'll maintain it, you get 30% of the honey, and I keep 70%. So that was his deal, and it worked out so well, and he's doing amazing. But we talked about, like, in the process of prepping for the interview and learning more about bees, I just became obsessed with them. And there's an analogy that just that stayed with me all the time, and I always come back to, and it's that there was a New York Times study on the hierarchy of bees. They wanted to know if there was a hierarchy. So, you know, there's a queen and then there's a colony, but what in the colony is higher and lower? Like, who is operating and doing more jobs? And so what I found out, or what that New York Times study found out, was that 20% of the hive does 50% of the work. And then they wanted to know what happens when you get rid of that 20%, which they did. And they realized, and what they saw was another 20% rose. And it's always come back to me, this idea of survival and this idea of changing and growing and evolving and becoming independent as human beings, and just like figuring out, knowing what you know and what you don't know, right? And I always come back to that, you know, like, you just step up, and just like you did in Portugal, and your Brazilian friends were like, you got to step up, like, and you get, you know, kind of just forced. I was like, fine, I love you guys so much, I will step up. You also discovered the ukulele, and you said you had found your sound. So, and you said you started to write music from like the day you strummed on the ukulele. So will you tell me, like take me back to that day?
Yeah. It was actually like quite reluctant that I did it. So I'd played guitar before, like very mediocre, like not even quite mediocre, like almost mediocre. Really not great. So I played guitar, but I sang and I did all that stuff, but I rarely wrote music, like maybe one or two songs. But a friend of mine uh, had played ukulele, and I'm like, what a nerd. What a baby instrument. That's a little baby toy. No. And he got me ukulele for Christmas. I was like, yeah, okay, sure, I'm gonna play that. Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Nice try. You want me to join your band and or do all that? No.
I'm not gonna do it, you nerd. And then one day I was hired to play a gig in Portugal, and so I was like, okay, I gotta start practicing, gotta rehearse, and my guitar strings broke, and so I was like, oh, okay, and so I went to go to my local guitar shop, my local music shop, and it was closed because it was hot. And I remember I was like, when are they going to open again? And my neighbor was like, it's hot. And I was like, what? And they're like, I don't know. When it stops being hot, he'll open. I was like, number one, that's very healthy boundaries.
Yeah, I know. Businesses know how to operate and take care of themselves. That's very refreshing.
I know. I was like, that's the best response ever. Where is he? When is he coming back? It's hot. Okay. Elaborate. But I was like, this is the best answer ever. And so I was like, okay, well, so I can't get my guitar strings. And so I was like, okay, ukulele, you and I are going to be friends for a brief, fleeting moment, and then we'll see. And so I started to plunk around on it. And within like 10 minutes, I'd written a song, and I was like, oh my God, is this dumb little instrument like my thing now? And I just kept writing and writing and writing. And now I don't even own a guitar, but I do own 6 ukuleles. I
Whoa.
know.
You're a nerd. You're a
I
ukulele nerd.
Yeah.
How did you confess to your friend who gave you the uke?
Well, I was like, so I started playing the ukulele. He's like, oh, go on. And I was like, darn it. So yeah, he won. His name is Steve Berryman. If he has a little listen to the Steve Berryman.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate you. So yeah, so now actually I have a ukulele just hanging on the wall just there, and I just pull it down and noodle around on it whenever I so fancy. And yeah, it's great. So ukuleles, highly recommend.
That's so cool. I started learning the ukulele like 6 weeks ago. And I was the same, like somebody just, I mean, nobody gave it to me, but the first house that I moved into in Canberra, the housemate that I had, he like loves playing the piano, he plays guitar, he strums. So he was a musical kid. And we would just start jamming. So he would play the guitar and I would sing. And then this is what I love. So the landlord, the house that we were in, the landlord lived in the house. It was a couple. It was a young couple. And she wasn't very musical, but she loved music. And so she said that she wants to have instruments around in the house and available. So if people come over, they can play. They can just pick it up and jam. And I just love that. I love that so much. And so one of the instruments that she had was a ukulele, and I had never played it before. And it looked less intimidating than a guitar. And so, my housemate and we would just jam, and I would play the uke. And then eventually, like a few months later, I was like, I think I should buy one, I think it'd be fun to like, mess around with it and see what happens. And then he ended up linking me like a ukulele on Marketplace. And I was like, oh, this looks really good. And it was a double stringed. It was so beautiful. It's so, so beautiful. Ended up getting it, started, classes, and I'm like in my 4th week, and it's just the best. It's so, and at the same, like the one thing happened to me is that as soon as I started strumming it, like I started singing and like, I, started to make music. I was like, what is this? Oh my God. But so now do you perform often?
I used to. Well, now since hashtag COVID, it's been a lot less. And actually, since returning to Canada, I've not played nearly as much. I had some bands that I played in when I lived abroad, and I was really feeling creative. And so I wrote a lot of music then, but I haven't. But the funny thing is, like recently, life has been a bit tumultuous over the recent years. And so now I've noticed the music coming back. And so I've written a couple of songs in the past couple of months, and I was like, oh, it's coming back. So I hope that I can find more folks to collaborate with, because for me, music is so much more powerful shared. Yeah. So I'm hoping to get back into it, because I feel like my little soul is coming alight again, which is nice.
That's so lovely. And I think you need to just live a little bit and process life in order to articulate it in a sound as well. Like, you just got to do life and get through it. And then you can be like, okay, what just happened? And how do we get through this with melody, right? So then you went to, after Portugal, you went to Vietnam. And so you taught theater at the United Nations School. But tell us about this like common sense explosion that you had.
Yeah. I often ask people, because I'm in the dating world now, I'm like, what exploded your brain? And because I find these moments so important, like to have brain explosions. And so mine was this. And I remember exactly where I was. I remember what I was looking at in this moment where I was driving down Swanzeo, which is a main street in Hanoi. And I remember going, oh, common sense is cultural. Oh my God, common sense. My common sense doesn't work here. Oh my God, I'm an idiot here. And it was just like this realization of like, not everyone in this whole vicinity of me is wrong and I am right. And why is everyone acting like a maniac? I was like, oh, I'm the maniac. In this context, I am the maniac. That was like a tough pill to swallow, this realization of like, oh my God. All this stuff that I think is so weird here, I'm weird. Okay.
Did that come in like coupling with that white privilege realization that you had?
Yeah, there was I really, especially with like colleagues and stuff, seeing the hierarchy of how people are treated, in working within, the expat communities and that kind of thing, is that, people with my skin are treated differently. And, I have a much different experience, and like befriending a lot of lovely Vietnamese women, realizing like how different our worlds were. And neither was better or worse, but I needed to also realize that the way that my world functioned was drastically different than how their world functioned. I need to get my head out of my ass and realize that my ideas weren't necessarily right, or what I thought women, should be able to do, be allowed to do, the way they should be able to be allowed and express themselves. That didn't work for everyone, and that actually it was quite judgmental of me to think that other people should behave that way, because maybe that's not what their culture honors. And yeah, it was just so many realizations of well-meaning people going into places, and we're just so ignorant. And I think that it's really important that we know we're going in ignorant and just go, I'm going to be a dummy and I'm going to go and I'm going to learn. It's not about knowing everything, and I don't think it's about that at all. It's about this idea of being aware that you don't know everything, because then you become a sponge and you can learn and you can move through things, and you can make mistakes.
You're just a student of life. I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage to go into a new place, a foreign area, and just survive, just figure it out. And you do change, you're a different person to who you were when you left. But you stayed in Vietnam for 3 years. You write that it was exceptional and so hard. And I love that paradox, because I think so many people talk about how amazing and happy, or not happy, but how extraordinary, life can be through their successes, or how incredible it is to be alive and be grateful and be joyous, but that it's work. It's not easy I feel like it's also, it's easier to be upset about life. It's harder to like have that courage to find meaning and to be like, no, this is a great day. The sun's out, I am, sitting down with you. This is an extraordinary day. And so this idea of something being an experience being exceptional and so hard, tell us about how it was both.
Yeah, I've really liked adopting the word and rather than but.
Oh my God, me too.
Because but like reverses what we just first said. So I'd like to tack and on instead, because it's a lot nicer, or a lot more inclusive. Like it's more three-dimensional. It's a three-dimensional experience, right? It's both. Both are true.
Yeah, exactly. And none is being compromised.
Yeah, I would say I definitely previously fell into this category of toxic positivity. And like I will only be positive and I will only think these and I will only be grateful and I'll only. But then you shut yourself off to the whole other experience of life. And we don't experience true, deep, meaningful, beautiful joy unless we also allow ourselves to fall deeply into the hard stuff. And yeah, and it was so hard. And to be very honest, that it was very hard. Um, even just by simple fact of like, no, it sounds very silly, but it was stressful to not know the price of everything all the time. I had to go and negotiate the prices. And that was so different for me, where I'm like, oh, in my culture, it is rude to barter with someone on their goods and services. And I had to do that every single day for everything. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just different. And it was hard to do that. And to also this cultural thing of like, in my culture, this is rude, but in this culture, this is the way of life. So I think it's rude, but it's not rude because here it's not rude. And so it's this real interesting thing of like, I'm offended by certain things, but no one else is offended. So there's no right or wrong in this situation. It was just this really interesting mind bending thing of how different things were. And you know, the pollution was really hard. I constantly had sinus infections like all the time. So there was all of the challenge in that way. But so much beauty and so much beauty. Yeah, I played music with exceptional musicians and artists, and I learned about a culture which is still a beautiful mystery to me, and a language that is still a beautiful mystery to me. I learned, you know, I could have little basic conversations like a bit of a 10-year-old. That was it. Yeah, it allowed me to be uncomfortable and have the gift of being uncomfortable, because I think often as white people we don't get the gift of discomfort, and so we have this misleading idea that we're always meant to be comfortable, and if we are uncomfortable it's bad.
Yeah, and I think it's like this idea. I had that realization too, that positive toxicity, when I think at one point, I don't know when it was, but I just started to realize like I can be happy and sad at the same time. Like I can be happy about something that's happening in my life, but I can also be sad that I'm, missing someone or something, and I can feel more things in one go. I don't need to choose, and I don't need to be boxed in one idea. Like I feel like the last few years have been such a huge transition for me. It's been a huge transition for me. And like you said, that uncomfortableness has been a gift, because it's just fertile ground. Like you just don't know where things are going to go. Again, coming back to you don't know. But I realized that I can also, grieve, but I can also feel so much gratitude for this day. Like it's so good. And that's been such a gift to know that you can do both. But speaking of hard things, you've gone through a lot of hard things in the past few years. I'm just going to lay it out and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. So you moved to Thailand, and you said that that was the hardest year of your existence. You realized that teaching wasn't for you anymore. You had an identity crisis when returning to Canada. You weren't in the role of a traveler, a teacher, a musician, or a band anymore. You moved to Montreal, you completed a master's degree in creative arts therapy, and that's where you found, your groove and your passion. You moved to Nova Scotia, Canada, and then you started your private practice. COVID hit. Then you were diagnosed with breast cancer last April in 2021 with a double mastectomy and reconstruction, unhoused. Like, holy shit. What is going through your body and mind as I'm like just listing all these things out?
Yeah, there's so much. Like I feel activation even just going like, oh, that was the time. And I didn't even talk about what I was misdiagnosed with cancer in Thailand and had a surgery.
What?
Yeah, so that's a whole other thing in and of itself. And then I was hit by a car.
Oh my God.
It was a time. And then I came back to Canada and had my identity crisis. Like it was a time.
There were a few things.
There were a few things. And what I will say, so yes, cancer was a big surprise because I was only 35 at the time. And to go with such a drastic intervention, such as a double mastectomy, because we found it early, but based on the types of cells that were there, how widespread they were, they said, we need to do this in order to make sure that it doesn't, arrive in the other breast as well. So we went in full throttle. And, as we know, when one new trauma happens, it often rattles all of our old stuff, right? And I'm really lucky that I was working with a wonderful therapist for 3 previous years. And so we just kind of really dived right in and we're like, okay, here's this old stuff coming up and let's process through it. And I've been able to access so much beautiful grief that I never was able to access before, which has been, grief is such a wisdom and such a beautiful thing when it's shared, because I don't think a human is meant to experience grief by themselves. I think it's meant to be shared. And so I'm really fortunate that I had so many beautiful friends that were really lovely and supportive. And, from around the world, they would call me at different times. I always had someone calling or texting me to make sure I was okay and I didn't feel alone. But cancer is a lonely experience a lot of the time. It is a very isolating experience. And then, helping heal your own old trauma, that is often an isolating experience too. So yeah, the grief was immense, and it's been really wonderful to get to meet my grief because I'd never accessed it before. I'd always been like toxically positive and like, I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to be grateful. But then I was missing a very large part of the story, the sad part, the painful part, the parts of me who were in pain. I left those parts of me behind for a really long time. And now I know them. And now I know all of these elements of myself that I didn't know before. It's been like a homecoming of like, oh, I get to meet myself. I've never known myself in such a deep and meaningful way. And it feels really nice to be in my skin now, because before I was always kind of aching to get out of it. And so it's nice to be here.
You bought a tiny house, you renovated it, and you say you live in it with immense happiness and pride. And you say that this year is your year of resting.
Yeah. Yes.
What does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I only realized this like 3 weeks ago. I was like, is this what rest feels like? I've never done this before. This is cool. This is cool. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? This is great. I'll do it. Give me more. Yeah. So I'd always dreamed of having a little tiny house just because I loved small, cute spaces. Like the idea of like living in a treehouse is like a dream. So, I'd been like binge watching for 7 years, tiny house living. And I'm like, and I'd always lived around the world. I didn't own very much. Like it was like whatever's in my backpack, like everything I own is in this space. It's 2.5 meters by 6 meters.
So no storage space.
Oh, I have storage space right there.
Oh, as in like a separate storage, like a separate storage unit. Yeah.
No, that's not my jam.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I'm not into that. I don't like stuff. Well, I mean, I've never really owned that much stuff. So
yeah, I'm the same. Like I got really stressed out towards the end of last year. It was my first year living in Canberra, and I was like, I just have accumulated so much stuff. So I did like a massive cull of all my shit, and now I'm just got really minimal things. And I also turned my car into a camper, so I like keep the things that I want to keep. And I also I'm so obsessed with like minimalism and tiny houses and things. And I mean, I just remember stuff makes me feel overwhelmed. Like if it's very few things that I love and they stay with me, I also have this idea of home. And I feel like home is like, at this moment, like I feel like a lot of my home is in my car, but I love it because I'm always in motion. Like I'm always driving and I'm the happiest in my car. But this idea of like like motion in my life is like something that's happening. So I don't feel like I'm ready to settle down, but a tiny house seems pretty magical.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I'm the third owner of this tiny house. She was built in 2014. I named her the Witches Coven, because who are witches but the OG badass bitches who shirk the patriarchy and live on the outskirts of town and do their own thing? I want to be that. So I love her. But like, yeah, the thing I really love about it is you have to be really creative with this space. And so like I built my couch and sewed all the cushions and the pillows, and I plumbed in my tiny bathtub, which is like insufferably cute. I can plumb stuff now. I made a gray water system. I remember when I did it, I was like, I made a gray water system.
I'm getting into this is the coolest part is that I'm also like I watch van life videos. Like I'm really obsessed, and like in like a year or two's time, like I want to get a van and convert it and like just drive around Australia.
You should drive here and then you can park next to me.
I know. Wouldn't that be something? It'd just be so cool to just live in a. I think I like the idea of mentally getting all my shit sorted, that I just have what I need in a van is one thing. But then also like just the idea of like picking up wherever I am and just figuring it out. Like I like that. It seems more up my alley for now. But yeah, that sounds like so amazing. And so what I was meant to say is that in these van life videos, like they're always renovating. Like they're always like these women are just like figuring it out. And in one video, her name's Hannah Lee Duggan, and she has a YouTube channel, and it was she put a video up of how she constructed her van. But now she has like 2 cabins in the woods, and she's like renovated them. And so she shows these videos of how she's done them. But in the beginning, when she did the van life, she's like, I literally just went to, I think it's Home Depot, your equivalent. I think ours is Bunnings. So she said, I just went to Home Depot and like kept asking questions. And she said the difference now is like, it's not, I'm not afraid to try new things that way. So like it's almost like the muscle of trying something new strengthens. And so it's not even about facing your fear. It's like your muscle's already strong because you've done it before. It's not as terrifying. And so I'm sure that would have been for you, like making your own stuff, like your own couch. What?
Yeah, it's really cool. She's really beautiful too. I was like, get it, girl. But I was just, funny enough, I was just at Home Depot about an hour ago asking questions. I was like, if I were to live in a tiny house and my propane stove is, heating up the wall so much that the wallpaper is peeling off, what would a girl do about that? Because you have to be so creative, because you have to be aware of the weights, you have to be aware of all this stuff, and you're like, okay, how am I going to do this? But yeah, I've really gotten used to like, okay, just try, like do a bunch of research, try, and if it sucks, okay, we'll redo it. That happened with my shower surround. I did it. It sucks. I gotta redo it. I'm very annoyed, but also I was like, okay, well, you gave it a try and it works for now, and then come springtime, you can redo that and XYZ. But yeah, it's really an exercise in not being married to an outcome. You're like, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. And then like there's some really like I also am parked on my friend's lot. So my house plugs into her house. It's insufferably cute. Her house is also the same color as mine, unplanned, but it looks like her house birthed my house.
It's too much.
Also amazing. It's too much. My friend, who, not this friend, different friend, her thing is everything in my house is insufferably cute. And so when she comes in, she's like, oh, I hate it. It's great. Keep it. So dumb. I'm like, isn't it dumb? Isn't this dumb?
This is amazing. I just love this. It's just something's coming up. I really love watching interviews other than giving them. I think comes from the fact that I just love watching conversations. And there was a conversation that happened between Oprah and Tracy Ellis Ross. She had a conversation with Oprah, and she was saying, it's rare to find women who live and lead robust, abundant lives that's not in context to a man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it just made me think of you.
What a compliment. That one hit me right in my heart. Thank you for saying that. What a generous thing to say.
No, it's true. It just came up. What are you most excited about now? What's coming up for you in your life?
Um, resting. I'm good at it now. I'm gonna like keep doing that.
This is good. I'm sticking with it.
I'm like, oh yeah, give me more of that. Give me 9 hours of sleep a night, please and thank you. Um, the fun thing is, so I used to always dream about like, where am I going to go next? What am I going to do next? Um, and the really cool thing, and this is just, I think it's just been by being with, this excess amount of grief and gratitude and all of it, like at the same time, is that like I really like each day when I get up, I'm like, check out the sunshine in my stupid windows. This is great. And I have my amazing coffee. And like this morning, I woke up and there's coyote footprints around my tiny house. And so I was like, maybe I'll catch him. Like, not catch him. I'm not going to catch a coyote, but I'm going to try and like peek out my window because this is the second day in a row that he's been around. And so I quite like the idea of trying to catch a coyote visually only. I have had an owl that looks the exact same as the Harry Potter owl sit on top of.
Hedwig? Are you serious right now?
Can I tell you the story about this?
Please.
Okay, so my bedroom is this loft at the top of this staircase there. So my room is literally a bedroom because I was like, I could have a reasonably sized bed and have space, or I could make that entire thing a bed. And so I did the second idea. So it's a whole bed and it's amazing. And so I wake up and so like I can touch the ceiling. Like when I sit up, the ceiling's there. And so I woke up one morning and the sun is coming in the windows and I hear like across my roof because I have a metal roof. And I was like, what on earth is that? It sounded like rats. And I was like, that's not possible. My roof is like 5 meters high. And I'm not around any trees and I have no downspout. So like, I don't know what that is. And so I was like, okay, what is, maybe that, and then it happened again. And so I went, boof, 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 and I hear dunk, dunk, dunk from above me. And I was like, what was that? And so then I hear them rattling again, and I hear dunk, dunk, dunk. And then they do it again, boom, boom, boom. I was like, what is happening? There was more than one creature up there. And I was like, what is going on? So then I went downstairs and I went outside and these crows flew away. It was this like 3 or 4 crows flew away. And I was like, huh. But then I could still hear this sound. I was like, what is that thing? And so I went outside and I looked above and freaking Hedwig turned around, looked at me with his beautiful eyeballs, and then flew away like a majestic creature.
Oh my God.
I can't tell you how many times I've told this story because my life is made of magic. That's what's happened. So I'm looking forward to like being here and seeing what it's like in the summertime because I live in wine country. And about 10 minutes away from the nearest town. So I'm looking forward to seeing what summer is going to be. We've got a really big piece of land here that we're planning on making a really big vegetable garden and like getting folks from the community who are smarter than us to come and help us figure out how to do this because we're dummies and we don't know what to do. So we're like, hello farmers, do you want to help us?
We're great dummies. We will learn.
Oh my God, I'm a great idiot. I'm great.
I'm so good at it.
Oh yeah. Years of practice. So that's what I'm looking forward to, just like leaning into it, continuing my private practice with these beautiful, powerful people that I get to work with, but doing it slowly to actually let my body heal because I've never really given myself time to do that. So it's nice to give myself that gift of rest. So that's what I'm really excited about is figuring out who am I when I'm rested. I don't know. We'll see.
Zippy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for this. It was cool.